In this episode, we're going to pull together the idea of control types and move from understanding them to applying them in a way that actually reduces privacy risk. A privacy program that relies on only one kind of measure, like policies, or only one kind, like encryption, tends to fail because real-world risk is messy and multi-layered. Technical measures can prevent or contain many failures, but they can be misconfigured or bypassed if processes are weak. Administrative measures can create discipline and clarity, but they can become slow or ignored if they are not integrated into how teams work. Organizational measures shape culture, accountability, and decision-making, but culture alone cannot stop a misconfigured system from exposing data. The practical skill is choosing a combination of technical, administrative, and organizational measures that match the privacy risk you are facing, and then making sure those measures reinforce each other rather than leaving gaps. By the end of this episode, you should be able to look at a risk scenario, explain what kind of measures would reduce it, describe how those measures work at a high level, and anticipate where they might fail so you can strengthen them. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A strong way to start is by grounding mitigation in the nature of the risk, because mitigation is not just about adding controls, it is about reducing specific harms. Privacy risk usually shows up as unauthorized access, unauthorized use, excessive collection, uncontrolled sharing, retention creep, or inadequate transparency and rights support. Each of these risk types has different root causes, and root causes determine the best mix of measures. If the root cause is broad access and weak logging, technical access controls and monitoring may be primary, supported by administrative access review and organizational accountability for approvals. If the root cause is unclear purpose and frequent reuse, administrative measures like documented justification and review gates may be primary, supported by technical minimization and organizational training that prevents teams from treating data as a free resource. If the root cause is vendor sprawl, administrative contracting measures and organizational procurement alignment may be primary, supported by technical controls that limit what data is shared. The important beginner insight is that mitigation starts with diagnosis, because without diagnosis you end up applying attractive measures that do not touch the real risk. A mature privacy program is not the one with the most controls, but the one with controls that match reality. Technical measures are often the most visible because they sound like security, but in privacy management, they are about much more than keeping attackers out. Technical measures include access control, encryption, segmentation, monitoring, data loss prevention, pseudonymization, secure deletion, and design choices that minimize data collection. Their strength is consistency at scale, because once implemented correctly, they operate the same way every day, even when people are tired. Their limitation is that they depend on correct configuration and on the system architecture being able to support the rule you want. For example, you can want strict retention, but if the system design cannot reliably delete data without breaking functionality, you will struggle unless you redesign parts of the workflow. Technical measures also fail when data moves into places the measures do not cover, like exports, screenshots, or ad hoc databases created for analytics. That is why privacy management emphasizes data pathways and copies, because technical protections must follow the data. When a technical measure is chosen, a privacy manager should ask where it applies, what it does not cover, and what evidence will show it is working. Administrative measures are the procedures and processes that shape how decisions are made and how work is performed. In privacy management, these include data use approvals, change management gates, vendor due diligence, contract reviews, privacy impact assessments, incident response processes, retention schedules, and rights request workflows. Their strength is that they can handle complex judgment because not every decision can be automated safely. For example, deciding whether a new analytics project is compatible with existing purposes often requires contextual analysis and documented reasoning. Their limitation is that they rely on people following the process, and people under pressure sometimes bypass processes they view as obstacles. Administrative measures also fail when they become ritualized, meaning approvals are granted without real review or assessments are completed with generic text that does not reflect the actual system. A privacy manager applying administrative measures should focus on making them lightweight enough to be used, specific enough to be meaningful, and integrated into existing workflows so they are not optional add-ons. The goal is to create friction only where friction reduces risk, not to create friction as a demonstration of seriousness. Organizational measures are the structures, roles, incentives, and cultural practices that make privacy controls sustainable over time. These include clear accountability for data stewardship, leadership support for privacy decisions, training that is relevant to job roles, internal reporting channels for concerns, and performance expectations that include privacy compliance. Organizational measures also include how teams are staffed, such as whether there are dedicated owners for data governance, access reviews, and incident response coordination. Their strength is that they influence behavior in situations where technology and procedures cannot cover every moment, like how a support agent speaks with a customer or how a manager decides whether to approve a data export. Their limitation is that culture is uneven and can drift, especially during reorganizations, rapid growth, or leadership changes. Organizational measures can also fail if accountability is unclear, because when everyone is responsible, no one feels responsible. Privacy management relies on organizational measures to ensure that technical and administrative controls are not one-time projects, but ongoing practices that are maintained, improved, and defended when pressure arises. Now let's make this practical by focusing on how these measures work together, because mitigation is usually a combination rather than a single solution. Imagine the risk is excessive internal access to a sensitive dataset, leading to accidental exposure and difficulty responding to rights requests. A technical measure would be tightening role-based access and limiting export capability, with logging of sensitive access events. An administrative measure would be implementing an access request and review process, ensuring access is granted only with a clear business need and reviewed periodically. An organizational measure would be assigning ownership for the dataset and making managers accountable for approving access appropriately, supported by training that explains why least privilege matters. If you do only the technical change, access may creep back over time. If you do only the administrative process, people may bypass it with informal copies. If you do only training, behavior may improve briefly and then drift. Together, the measures create a system where permissions are tight, approvals are controlled, and accountability is visible. That is the essence of layered mitigation. Another common privacy risk is uncontrolled sharing with third parties, where data is sent to vendors without clear limits on use, retention, and onward disclosure. A technical measure here would be minimizing what data is shared, using secure transfer methods, and restricting vendor access to only what is necessary. An administrative measure would be vendor due diligence, contractual clauses that limit use and require deletion, and a process for approving new vendors or new data sharing. An organizational measure would be aligning procurement and business teams to treat vendor onboarding as a controlled pathway, with clear accountability for who approves sharing and who monitors vendor performance. Failure modes show you why all three matter. Technical controls can be undermined if business teams upload data to a vendor platform without the approved method. Administrative controls can be undermined if contracts are signed without privacy review due to deal pressure. Organizational controls can be undermined if leadership rewards speed without accountability. Combining measures reduces the chance that any single failure becomes a breach, and it also makes it easier to detect and correct drift when it begins. Retention creep is another excellent example because it involves technology, process, and culture at the same time. A technical measure might include automated deletion or anonymization jobs, plus restrictions that prevent creating uncontrolled copies that persist. An administrative measure would be a retention schedule tied to data categories and systems, with defined exceptions like legal holds and a process to review those exceptions. An organizational measure would be assigning owners to ensure retention rules are implemented and to track compliance over time, supported by messaging that keeping data forever is not a neutral decision. Retention controls often fail through inconsistency, where production data is managed but logs, backups, and exports keep data far longer. They also fail through vague ownership, where everyone assumes someone else is handling deletion. Applying measures effectively means mapping where data exists, ensuring the retention rule covers all locations, and verifying through reports or audits that deletion actually happened. Retention is a strong test of program maturity because it forces alignment between intent and reality. Transparency and rights support provide another perspective because these risks are not purely about confidentiality, but about fairness and the ability to honor individuals' expectations. A technical measure here might include building capabilities to locate an individual's data, to correct it, to restrict processing, or to delete it reliably across systems. An administrative measure would include documented workflows for receiving and verifying requests, tracking deadlines, and coordinating across teams and vendors. An organizational measure would include training customer-facing teams to recognize rights requests, ensuring adequate staffing to meet deadlines, and leadership support when rights requests create operational burden. These controls fail when systems are fragmented and no one can locate data, when requests are treated as rare exceptions rather than as normal operations, or when teams view rights requests as nuisance work to be delayed. Applying measures effectively means designing for rights support as a routine capability, not a last-minute scramble. Privacy management adds value by making rights support part of system planning rather than part of crisis handling. It is also important to recognize that the same measure can have different effects depending on how it is implemented, which is why failure modes matter. Encryption is a strong technical measure, but if keys are poorly managed or if exports are left unencrypted, the protection is weaker than it appears. Training is a valuable organizational measure, but if it is generic and unrelated to a person's job, it becomes background noise and behavior does not change. Due diligence is a valuable administrative measure, but if questionnaires are answered vaguely and no evidence is required, it becomes a ritual that does not predict vendor performance. Access reviews are valuable, but if managers approve everything automatically, the review becomes meaningless. This is why mature privacy programs emphasize evidence, measurement, and improvement. Applying measures is not about declaring success. It is about checking whether the measure changed the risk and whether it stayed effective over time. A privacy manager should always ask how we will know this works and how we will notice if it stops working. Another practical lesson is that mitigation should be designed to survive busy periods, because risk increases when people are rushed. During major launches, acquisitions, incidents, or staffing shortages, teams look for shortcuts. A program that collapses during busy periods is not a reliable program. So when you apply measures, you should prioritize designs that make the safe path easy and the unsafe path inconvenient. That might mean automating certain controls, simplifying approval processes, providing secure tools for sharing, or embedding privacy checks into existing change management. Organizationally, it might mean ensuring that privacy owners have the authority to pause high-risk changes until safeguards are in place. This is not about slowing the business. It is about preventing the kinds of failures that cause far greater delays later through incident response and remediation. Mitigation that supports business continuity is often the mitigation that gets adopted because it feels like help rather than policing. As we close, applying technical, administrative, and organizational measures to mitigate privacy risk is about building a balanced control system that matches the real drivers of risk and remains effective under real-world stress. Technical measures provide consistent enforcement and reduce reliance on perfect behavior, but they must be correctly configured and applied wherever data flows. Administrative measures provide structured decision-making and documentation for complex choices, but they must be integrated into workflows to avoid bypass and rubber stamping. Organizational measures create accountability and shape culture, but they require clear roles and sustained support to avoid drift. The strongest privacy programs combine these measures so they reinforce each other, closing gaps that any single measure would leave open. When you can diagnose a risk, select a layered set of measures, anticipate limitations, and define evidence that proves the measures work, you are practicing privacy management in its most practical form. That is how you reduce harm while enabling the organization to operate confidently and responsibly with personal data.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.